There are people who remain calm in a way that sends a chill through you, as if nothing in this world could ever touch them. But is that calmness truly strength, or is it simply a performance meant to hide what they don't dare to face? This video will take you into the deepest layer of counterfeit calm. There are people who move through life with such stillness that you can't help but look at them. When everyone around them is shaken by a single word, a sudden event, or an unexpected emotion, they remain there unmoved, like someone has locked every expression on their face in place. That serenity creates a strange silence, an empty space that even the noise of the world cannot enter. But the more you observe, the more one truth emerges: that stillness is not peace. It is a stage where they perform being fine, being mature, being emotionless. Every gentle nod, every thin smile, every soft "I'm okay" carries the marks of a role rehearsed to perfection. They are not living. They are acting out a safe version of themselves, one they believe the world expects them to be. Among people who show their anger honestly, among those whose hands tremble when they are hurt, among those who let sadness spill from their eyes, these people stand out with absolute flatness. Not the flatness of someone who has reached wisdom, but the flatness of someone who does not dare to let a single emotion escape. In their eyes, there is something like a tightly closed door, open just enough for you to glimpse the darkness behind it, but never enough for you to step inside. Sometimes you catch them in an unguarded moment. When they hear something painful, their face remains calm, but their fingers tighten ever so slightly. When sadness touches them, their eyes blink one beat slower. When anger rises, they inhale deeply, as if swallowing it all the way down. Every emotion is processed internally, leaving no trace on the surface. It makes you feel both admiration and unease, because you know that human beings were not made to stand still like statues. We were made to tremble. We were made to feel. And if someone does not tremble, does not show, does not allow themselves to waver, it means they have learned to bury their emotions somewhere far deeper than any gaze can reach. You look at them, and a question rises naturally, like a shadow inside your mind. Why must they be calm to that extent? Why must they perform strength, perform maturity, perform emotional numbness as if it were a suit of armor? Why can't they be angry when anger is needed, sad when sadness is honest, trembling when the heart truly hurts? And then, as curiosity touches a very small but very true point, you begin to wonder something deeper. Is that calmness really strength? Or is it simply fear standing perfectly still? There is something the world often misunderstands. When we see someone calm in every circumstance, we quickly assume they are strong, grounded, more mature than everyone else. We imagine that their silence is the result of a soul that has weathered countless storms and learned how to stand without trembling. But if you sit beside such people for just one extra breath, if you listen deeply to the stillness they carry, you will notice something entirely different. They are not truly calm. They have simply learned to hide their emotions so well that even they sometimes forget what it is they have hidden. On the surface, they look like people who have everything under control, but inside, it is only a stage. A dark stage, without lights, without an audience, where they repeat a role no one asked them to play, but one they believe they must perform in order to feel safe. The role has become so familiar, so practiced, that they can no longer distinguish between who they truly are and who they have manufactured themselves to be, so they won't cause trouble. You will notice they always speak in the same tone, with the same phrases. It's okay. I'm fine. It's not worth being sad. I'm used to it. These seemingly peaceful sentences are actually thin walls they erect to conceal what they do not want anyone to see. It's not that they don't hurt. It's not that they don't fear. It's not that they don't get angry. It's simply that they no longer allow themselves to express those parts. And this is where the key turns in the lock of their inner world. They do not allow it. They do not allow tears to fall, because once their tears were dismissed. They do not allow their hands to tremble, because they were once blamed for that weakness. They do not allow anger to rise, because every time they explode, they end up apologizing more than the pain that caused the anger in the first place. Their emotions do not disappear. They are merely pushed deeper, tighter, darker, like an underground river running beneath the earth, always flowing but invisible to everyone. And when there is no other way to survive, they create a new version of themselves. A calm person, an easy person, a non-troublesome, non-disruptive person, someone the world can live with, can love, can trust. They perform, I'm okay, not because they are okay. They perform, I'm steady, not because they are steady. They perform, nothing can shake me, not because they are strong, but because they are exhausted from facing their real emotions. The world sees their silence and thinks it is tranquility, but in truth, it is withdrawal. The world thinks they are self-controlled, but in truth, they are simply afraid to reveal themselves. The world thinks they are mature, but in truth, they are locking their heart away so they won't have to take another blow. People call this emotional performance, but for them, it is not a performance. It is survival, because in their experience, every time they reacted honestly, it cost them something. Every time they opened their heart, a piece of them was hurt. Every time they let someone see who they really were, that door became the most vulnerable point of attack, and so they learned to close it, slowly, deliberately, but with certainty. If you are sensitive enough to look into the eyes of someone who is too calm, you will see something profoundly tired. Not the tiredness of the body, but the tiredness of holding everything in for far too long. The tiredness of swallowing emotions that should have been allowed to breathe. The tiredness of pretending to be fine even when, looking in the mirror, they no longer recognize how much they are tightening themselves just to stay composed. There are times when someone asks them, "Why don't you speak up? Why don't you get angry?" But they only smile, that thin smile, the kind of smile that, if you listen with your heart, you will understand is not a smile of indifference, but the smile of someone who has given up hoping that it is safe to show what is real. For them, silence is not merely a choice. Silence is the last refuge they can hide in. It is the cloak they wear so others cannot see through them. It is the breath they hold back because they fear that if they breathe too deeply, what they have hidden will spill out. They have lived for so long with the belief that the world only accepts a version of them that feels less emotional, neater, easier, calmer, and little by little, they shrink their true self to fit that mold, until they no longer know where the role ends and where they begin. And in the moment you understand this, everything becomes so clear it makes your heart sink. You realize that their calmness was never peace. It was the protective shell of a self that has once been wounded too deeply. A self that chose silence so it wouldn't be hurt again. A self that tries to survive by performing a gentler, quieter, less troublesome version of itself. And in that recognition, quiet, deep, wordless, something soft awakens inside you. A feeling like all the pieces have just clicked into place. That calmness is not always strength. Silence is not always maturity, and composure is not always peace. Sometimes, it is simply the way a person wraps themselves so the world cannot touch the place that hurts the most. And that understanding, light, profound, silent, opens the door to the next chapter of the story. There is something few people ever realize. The human self is not a solid block, but a layered architecture. These layers are not built with bricks, but with memories, not constructed with technique, but with the pains that once made the soul contract. When you look at someone who is too calm, you are not just seeing who they are today, you are witnessing a complex structure they have spent years building in order to survive. On the surface, they look like someone mature, composed, unshaken. This is the first layer of the ego architecture, the persona. A mask that psychology calls the social self, the place where each of us learns to become the version of a person the world can most easily accept. For most people, the persona is merely a temporary outfit. But for those who are too calm, the persona becomes armor. They wear it not to appear graceful, but to avoid being harmed. They maintain that composed exterior, as if any crack on the surface could collapse the entire structure. They learn to speak less, so they won't speak wrongly. They learn to remain calm, so no one will see the chaos inside. They learn to smile, so they won't be asked questions they are afraid to answer. But what makes this mask dangerous is not that it hides emotions, it's that they forget this is only the first layer, not their true self. That calmness, which looks like a virtue, is actually just a thin wall placed in front of a room locked from the inside. Go a little deeper, and you touch the second layer, the defensive ego. This is where the mind forms its survival beliefs. If I react, I will be hurt. If I tell the truth, I will be abandoned. If I show emotion, someone will use it against me. These beliefs do not appear by accident. They are carved from very real, very vivid, very painful experiences. Moments when they cried and were mocked, when they were angry and dismissed, when they longed to be understood and received only coldness in return. At this layer, silence is no longer a choice, it becomes a reflex. Reaction is no longer a capacity, it becomes a threat. So the ego changes strategy. Instead of expressing, it retreats. Instead of speaking, it swallows. Instead of anger, it chooses numbness, not because they are weak, but because their mind has learned one thing. In certain environments, not reacting is the only way to survive. People who are too calm are not indifferent to the world. They are only indifferent to revealing themselves because revealing themselves once cost them too much. And so this defensive ego functions like an invisible fence. You can come close to them, but you will never touch the deepest part of who they are. It is an automatic psychological mechanism, like a door that shuts the moment someone approaches. And if you go even deeper into the place where all behavior is born, you will find the third layer, the abandoned self. This is the most primal part of a person, but also the loneliest. This part does not speak much. It is not called by name. It simply stands there, silently, like a child left alone in the dark, waiting for someone to come back for it. This is where the real emotions live. The anger that was never spoken, the sadness that was never acknowledged, the wounds that were never soothed, the emotional needs that were never met. The abandoned self does not disappear. It only becomes locked away sometimes for years, behind the mask and the mature-looking defenses. And every time someone praises them as calm, mature, never losing control, that abandoned self is pushed back a little further, sinking deeper into a place even they are afraid to look at. But it remains there breathing, waiting, longing to be freed. When a person becomes too calm, it does not mean they feel less than others. On the contrary, they may be people who feel everything deeper, stronger, more intensely, so intensely that they must shut down their entire emotional system to avoid being swept away. Calmness is not their natural state. Calmness is their survival mechanism, a kind of temporary system shutdown to keep the internal software from overloading. If you understand this three-layer architecture, you will look at them with different eyes. You will see that their composure is not the destination of maturity, but the consequence of prolonged self-protection. You will understand that their silence is not apathy, but the imprint of psychological shocks they once had to suppress. And you will realize that beneath that calmness is a heart that once trembled so violently it had to lock itself shut just to keep from breaking. This is where psychology becomes perfectly clear. When emotions are suppressed for too long, the ego is forced to split itself into layers in order to maintain basic functioning. People who appear too calm are not those with extraordinary strength. They are simply people with extraordinarily sophisticated defense systems. And when you understand this, you will feel a strange sense of clarity, as if everything has finally been called by its true name. Calmness is not necessarily peace. Composure is not necessarily strength. And the silence they have held on to for so long is not their strongest quality. It may, in fact, be the most fragile part of them. Understanding this architecture of hurt is the key to entering the deeper part of the story where the cracks first begin to appear. There are moments that arrive so softly, as light as a breath, that even they themselves cannot hear them. Not loud, not dramatic, but enough to make a person realize that the calm they have been carrying is no longer a refuge. It begins to feel tight, like a rigid piece of armor, slowly squeezing around them. And they feel it not through logic, but through small signals in the body. A smile that becomes harder to hold, eyes that drift out of sync with the expression, a breath that hesitates half a beat, as if something inside is resisting the mask they are trying to wear. All this time, they believed silence was a form of strength, but gradually, silence begins to hurt them in a way they cannot name. Their heart beats faster, in moments that appear perfectly ordinary. Their hands turn cold, the nights grow longer, sleep becomes shallow, as if something inside wants to speak, but gets choked before it can become words. No one sees this, no one hears it, only them, the one standing in front of the mirror, looking at their own reflection and suddenly feeling strange. The face is still the same face they've known all their life, yet something no longer fits. As if they are staring at a person they recognize only through a role, not through the soul beneath it. In that moment, they realize something that tightens their chest. They are tired of pretending to be fine, tired of constantly staying balanced, tired of the easy smile that feels hollow, tired of the calmness that everyone assumes is strength, but which, to them, feels like a locked room with no exit. And this exhaustion is unlike any other because it does not live in the muscles, but in the ego, in the place where they have hidden their truest parts for so many years. When they have stood still for too long, been calm for too long, suppressed every reaction for too long, the inner self begins to reject the silence. It shifts very lightly, very quietly, but enough to create a thin crack, like the first fracture on the surface of ice. Sometimes it appears when they are brushing their hair, sometimes when they close their laptop after a long day, sometimes when someone asks, "Are you okay?" And the answer that rises inside is, "No." But their mouth reflexively releases the familiar line, "I'm fine." That is the moment that startles them, because this time, the "not fine" sounds louder than the "I'm fine." And they know that something inside is waiting for them to stop, not to collapse, but to admit that they have lived far too long inside a shell that doesn't belong to them. They begin to recognize a truth they have always avoided. The calmness they wear is not peace, but fear disguised as silence. Not maturity, but the habit of freezing their emotions so they won't have to face the storm within. And when this truth slips in softly, gently, yet unmistakably, it makes them stand still for a long time, as though seeing themselves for the first time in years. No one needs to break them. No one needs to shout at them that something is wrong. Just one small crack, so small but once it appears, it opens up an entirely different sky. A sky where they are forced to face the most painful realization of all. They were never calm. They were simply silent enough to survive. And once that awareness awakens, everything inside them changes forever, even if on the outside, everything still looks the same. There comes a moment that anyone who has ever lived inside the shell of being too calm must eventually pass through. This is no longer the stage of thin, delicate cracks. This is when everything inside them begins to surge upward all at once, loud, disordered, without warning, like a storm that has been compressed for far too long. Finally finding a slit to escape and erupting into the open. They once believed that calmness would save them, but it is precisely that counterfeit calm that has led them into the darkest corner of themselves. The breakdown does not arrive with a scream, but with a strange, unsettling sensation, emptiness. One day, they wake up and realize they no longer know what they feel. Not joy, not sadness, not anger, just emptiness. As if every emotion has been suctioned out of their body, as if only the physical shape remains, while the soul has wandered off into a nameless place. And the moment they try to touch whatever is left inside, the first thing they encounter is not anger or hurt, but a quiet panic. Who am I if I am no longer calm? If I stop performing, okay, will anyone stay? If I reveal myself, what will I lose? These questions have no clear answers, and that is the collapse of the ego. The defensive self can no longer hold them up. They begin to experience anxiety in ways they never allowed before. Their heart races at the most irrational times. Their breath becomes shallow. Their mind circles itself, searching for an exit, only to create more labyrinths. Sometimes they sit on their bed, hand against their chest, not to steady themselves, but to check whether their heart is still beating normally. They once believed that silence was safety, but now silence frightens them. Because in silence, they begin to hear themselves breaking. The boundary between self and role becomes so blurred that they can no longer distinguish who is real and who is the replica. Everything inside them grows heavy like stone. Walking feels heavy, speaking feels heavy, even breathing feels heavy, and exhaustion sets in. Not the exhaustion of the body, but the exhaustion of holding up a version of themselves they no longer have the strength to carry. There are nights when they sit alone, feeling as if the whole world is spinning while they remain frozen at the center. They touch themselves and feel nothing. When they try to cry, no tears come. When they try to smile, Their lips don't move. Only one question echoes within them. When did I get lost? That is the bottom of the breakdown, the bottom of the ego's collapse. But the strange thing about the bottom is this. From there, everything begins to brighten. In that thick darkness, they finally recognize something they never had the courage to look at directly. They no longer need to perform. They no longer need to be calm to the point of disappearing. They no longer need to swallow every storm so others can believe they are fine. They do not need strength to be loved. They do not need perfection to remain in anyone's heart. This moment is not radiant. It is not a blinding light. It is like a small flame flickering, quietly born from the very exhaustion that pushed them down to the bottom. A small flame, but enough for them to see. They have tried too hard to become the pleasant version, and forgotten that the real version is the one who deserves to live. They begin to feel the first true sadness again. Not a sadness that crushes them, but a sadness that is soft. A sadness that reminds them they are still alive. And then anger emerges, not to destroy, but to dismantle. They feel anger for having suppressed themselves for so long. Anger for freezing their own heart. Anger for turning calmness into chains. Anger for wearing an armor so long that they forgot the feeling of their own skin. Those very emotions, the ones buried the deepest, become the first escape route. They begin to let go. Let go of the empty, I'm fine. Let go of the need to be seen as strong. Let go of perfectionism. Let go of the habit of micromanaging every emotional ripple. Let go of the defensive ego they once believed was their strongest fortress. And in this letting go, they find something they have never touched before: liberation. Liberation is not screaming, not sobbing, not collapsing altogether. Liberation is the moment they exhale a full, complete breath with no tension, no hiding, no performing. Liberation is the moment they dare to say to themselves, I'm tired, I'm sad, I'm scared, I don't want to pretend anymore. Liberation is when they realize that self-love does not begin with strength, but with truth. And that is when they finally see their real self, the one who has stood behind the calm mask for so many years, waiting for them to return. The one who was forgotten, the one who was silenced, the one who was forced to stay quiet, the one who was taught that emotions were weakness. That self is opening its eyes again. The crisis brings them to the bottom, but it is the bottom that opens the door to freedom. No more performing, no more self-locking, no more turning themselves into a flat, quiet mirror to make others comfortable. For the first time in a very long time, they are allowed to be themselves, and that is what true peace really is. After a crisis, light does not burst forth immediately. There is no miraculous moment where everything returns to normal. What appears first, in truth, is a new kind of quiet. A quiet, unlike the old silence. Not heavy, not muzzled, not strained. It is like the first breath after breaking the surface of water. A breath that makes them suddenly aware that they are still alive, and this time, alive in a different way. In that quiet, they begin to feel something they once feared. They begin to touch the truest part of themselves again. For so long, they have lived by reflex. The reflex to be silent, the reflex to be strong, the reflex to appear fine. Now, when those reflexes no longer govern them, they finally realize how many years have passed without ever truly seeing what they need. Not what the world needs from them, but what they need. The words they once trapped in their throat every time they wanted to speak gradually become the words they dare to whisper. I need, a small sentence, yet it is the key that unlocks a door they had sealed long ago. When they say it, they no longer feel ashamed. They no longer feel guilty for inconveniencing others. They no longer feel weak for admitting their own needs. On the contrary, they begin to feel lighter, as if returning to themselves a part they had sacrificed far too much to protect others. And then they slowly understand a truth they never dared to believe. Emotions are not the enemy. Emotions do not come to break them. Emotions come to rescue them from the numbness they once mistook for strength. The emotions they had pushed to the bottom, anger, sadness, disappointment, hurt, rise again. But strangely, they are no longer as violent as feared. They are softer, warmer, like forgotten children returning to find the arms of their mother. For the first time in many years, they allow themselves to be angry without condemning themselves. They allow themselves to be sad without rushing to wipe their tears before anyone sees. They allow themselves to be disappointed without feeling ashamed. And they realize that each of these emotions, once acknowledged, becomes a small shard of light, helping them understand themselves more clearly. Another quiet transformation occurs: boundaries. They no longer let others cross their boundaries just to keep the peace. They no longer say, "It's okay," when their heart is actually cracking. They no longer nod simply to avoid disappointing someone. They re-establish their boundaries not to fight anyone, but to protect the most fragile part of themselves, the part they used to silence in exchange for being accepted. And when boundaries return, something miraculous happens. Calmness is no longer a wall. Calmness becomes a choice. No longer emotional paralysis. No longer a "I'm fine" used to escape danger. No longer a mask worn to avoid pain. The new calm, the true calm, is a steadiness that comes from knowing exactly what they feel, what they want, what they need. Calmness is not lack of emotion. Calmness is not being carried away by emotion. True calmness is feeling the tremor without breaking, not running, not sinking, just standing inside one's own heart, deep enough, real enough, luminous enough. And when they stand there, they begin to see the world more clearly, more gently, no longer feeling the need to defend themselves in every word, every glance, no longer forcing themselves to be strong in order to be loved, no longer compromising with emotional numbness just to maintain an outer shell of calm. They know now that they can feel, speak, love, hurt, hope, long, demand, set limits, and still be worthy. At this stage, they do not become a new version of themselves. They return to the version they had lost. Peace does not come from freezing oneself. Peace comes from reconciling with the parts once abandoned. And the rebirth of the self does not arrive with thunder. It arrives in a very small moment. The moment they realize they have the right to live a life without performing, without hiding, without disappearing to preserve someone else's comfort. This rebirth feels like opening their eyes for the first time without a mask. No defenses, no avoidance, no dimming of any part of themselves. They stand there whole, intact, true to themselves, and life no longer feels like a battle to endure, but a journey they can finally walk with lightness. And for the first time in a very long time, they are no longer afraid of their emotions. They see them as light, touch them as warmth, live with them as breath. The ego is no longer a wall of defense. It becomes the home they can finally return to. There is something that people who are too calm almost never say out loud. They have been still for so long that they have mistaken stillness for their nature. But after all the fractures, after the moments of facing their weary self, they begin to realize a very small truth. Small, yet powerful enough to change the entire way they see the world. True calmness is not silence. True calmness is not swallowing every storm inside themselves while keeping a face that never changes, as if nothing in the world could make them tremble. True calmness is not standing motionless, just to prove to others that they are strong enough not to fall. True calmness comes from somewhere much deeper, a place where they no longer need to perform, no longer need to act peaceful, no longer need to pretend to be the unmoving wall in the middle of a storm, just to be seen as mature. A person is only truly calm when they no longer have to pretend to be calm, when they no longer have to control themselves to the point of emotional paralysis just to maintain the image that everything is fine, when they no longer suppress every reaction, every breath, every tear, so others can feel comfortable, when they no longer have to grit their teeth to protect a shell they do not even want to live inside. True calmness is when they are real enough that performance becomes unnecessary, real enough to say, "I'm not okay," brave enough to admit, "I tremble too, I hurt too," steady enough to stop sacrificing themselves in order to keep the world pleased. And in that moment, they realize something painful yet liberating. For years, they have not lived peacefully. They have merely lived according to what others expected of them. They were calm not because their heart was smooth, but because the world never gave them permission to be shaken. So when they look back, they see clearly that they have lived like an actor on a stage that stretched on for far too long. The lines, "I'm fine, it's nothing, it's not a big deal," were like scripted dialogues they memorized from childhood. The soft gestures, the gentle nods, the endless attempts to smooth everything over They were the traits of a character created to soothe everyone else. And when that stage curtain slowly lowers, they finally understand they no longer need to play that role. No one demands that they remain still. No one requires their silence. No one has the right to ask them to erase their emotions to fit someone else's comfort. They begin returning the role that life once forced into their hands. They remove the calm mask gently, as if placing an object back on a table, and they step off the stage not to run away from the world, but to step into themselves. From then on, peace is no longer about standing firm against waves. Peace is no longer pretending to be a glassy lake. Real peace has ripples. It trembles. It feels sadness. It feels anger. It longs. It gets disappointed. It holds everything that makes a human being truly alive. And that is what makes them free. Free from needing to appear strong all the time. Free from tightening themselves so no one sees their softness. Free from expectations, from roles, from the compliments about their calmness that they once mistook as encouragement, but were actually reminders to keep freezing themselves. This freedom is not sweet at first. It is not instantly gentle. It comes from relearning how to walk with their own emotional feet after spending too long standing on the legs of self-defense. It comes when they feel sadness pass through and no longer rush to push it away. When they feel hope rising and no longer blame themselves for longing. When they feel anger without calling themselves a bad person. When they tremble without calling it weakness. They are simply returning to their human nature. And then, in a very quiet moment, no fanfare, no explosion, they realize they have changed. Not because they became stronger, but because they are no longer afraid of themselves. They realize that true calmness is a form of freedom. Not freedom from emotions, but from the fear of having to hide them. Not freedom from storms, but from the burden of pretending no storms exist. Not the silence of a quiet world, but the ability to tremble without losing themselves. And when they understand this, they look at life with different eyes, softer, brighter, more honest than ever before. In that place, peace is no longer a destination. It is how they live, how they breathe, how they see the world, and most importantly, how they see themselves, not through a mask, but through the gentlest truth of their own being.